The champagne flute slipped from Sienna's fingers, shattering against the marble floor like her dreams. Around her, the engagement party continued in a haze of laughter and clinking glasses, oblivious to the way her world had just fractured. "I can't marry you." Daniel's words hung between them, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and deceit. His grip on her wrist was too tight, his thumb pressing cruelly against the 4 pale scars that had always marked her skin. In the golden ballroom light, his handsome face might have looked apologetic, if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. "You're not what the family needs." The whispers started before she even fled. Sienna ran blindly, her ivory silk dress tearing on the rose bushes that lined the Kensington estate. Rain began to fall in icy sheets, mingling with the salt of her tears as she plunged into the dark embrace of blackthorn forest. The ancient trees groaned in the wind, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. Her lungs burned, her heels, those stupid, beautiful Jimmy Choos Daniel had bought her, sank into the mud as she stumbled over roots that seemed to shift beneath her feet. The forest smelled of damp earth and something else, something wild and electric that made the hair on her nape stand upright. When she finally collapsed against the widow's oak, its massive trunk scarred by centuries of storms, Sienna barely noticed how her own wrist scars pulsed in time with her racing heartbeat. The bark scraped against her bare shoulders as she slid down, her ruined dress soaking up mud and moss. "Why?" The word tore from her throat raw and broken. The oak's hollow seemed to swallow her cry whole. That's when she heard it, a breath that wasn't her own. The forest went unnaturally still. Even the rain seemed to pause mid-fall. Slowly, Sienna lifted her head and saw them. Eyes, amber and burning like banked coals in the darkness just beyond the tree line, they watched her with an intelligence that froze to sob in her throat. The shadows between the trees shifted, revealing the outline of something massive, a wolf. But not just any wolf. This creature stood nearly waist-high, its black fur glistening with rain and something silver? Moonlight caught on the strange markings along its muzzle, whorls and symbols that looked almost like tattoos. When it stepped forward, the earth itself seemed to tremble. Sienna's scars burned white-hot. The wolf froze. Its nostrils flared, drinking in her scent, fear and heartbreak, and something else, something buried deep. Recognition flashed in those ancient eyes. Then, impossibly, the massive beast bowed its head. A twig snapped to her left. Sienna turned just in time to see a second pair of glowing eyes appear, then a third. The entire forest seemed alive with watching predators. The black wolf snarled, a sound that vibrated in Sienna's bones. The other eyes vanished instantly. When she looked back, the alpha wolf was gone. Only the imprint of massive paws in the mud remained, along with a single white feather resting atop her torn dress, pristine despite the storm. Sienna touched the scars on her wrist. For the first time in her life, they didn't feel like wounds. They felt like a map. The forest held its breath as Kieran prowled the boundary stones, his massive paws sinking into the rain-softened earth. The moon hung heavy and full above him, its silver light catching on the intricate tribal markings that swirled across his obsidian fur. The sacred tattoos of the blackthorn alpha burned into his pelt the night he'd torn out his predecessor's throat. "You're too harsh on yourself." Jace's voice echoed in his memory as he passed the blood-stained oak where last month's challenger had died. The metallic tang still clung to the bark, mixing with the scent of damp moss and wolfsbane. His beta meant well, but Jace didn't understand, couldn't understand, the constant war raging inside him. The wolf wanted to run, to hunt, to claim. The man knew the cost of such indulgences. A sudden gust carried a scent that made both man and beast freeze mid-step. Human, female, hurt. This creature stood nearly waist-high, its black fur glistening with rain and something silver. Moonlight caught on the strange markings along its muzzle, whorls and symbols that looked almost like tattoos. When it stepped forward, the earth itself seemed to tremble. Sienna's scars burned white-hot. The wolf froze, its nostrils flared, drinking in her scent, fear and heartbreak, and something else, something buried deep. Recognition flashed in those ancient eyes. Then, impossibly, the massive beast bowed its head. A twig snapped to her left. Sienna turned just in time to see a second pair of glowing eyes appear, then a third. The entire forest seemed alive with watching predators. The black wolf snarled, a sound that vibrated in Sienna's bones. The other eyes vanished instantly. When she looked back, the alpha wolf was gone. Only the imprint of massive paws in the mud remained, along with a single white feather resting atop her torn dress, pristine despite the storm. Sienna touched the scars on her wrist. For the first time in her life, they didn't feel like wounds. They felt like a map. The forest held its breath as Kieran prowled the boundary stones, his massive paws sinking into the rain-softened earth. The moon hung heavy and full above him, its silver light catching on the intricate tribal markings that swirled across his obsidian fur. The sacred tattoos of the Blackthorn Alpha burned into his pelt the night he'd torn out his predecessor's throat. "You're too harsh on yourself." Jace's voice echoed in his memory as he passed the blood-stained oak where last month's challenger had died. The metallic tang still clung to the bark, mixing with the scent of damp moss and wolfsbane. His beta meant well, but Jace couldn't understand the constant war raging inside him. The wolf wanted to run, to hunt, to claim. The man knew the cost of such indulgences. A sudden gust carried a scent that made both man and beast freeze mid-step. Human, female, hurt. But not just any human. Kieran's entire body locked, his hackles rising like daggers along his spine. His wolf surged forward with such violence that his vision blurred at the edges, the world narrowing to that intoxicating fragrance, wild strawberries and summer rain, undercut by the sharp copper of freshly spilled blood. Mate. The realization hit him like a silver bullet to the chest. Jace materialized from the shadows in human form, his bare chest gleaming with ritual scars. Kieran? His amber eyes darted nervously to the fresh claw marks scoring the earth. A guttural snarl ripped from Kieran's throat as the scent deepened. Somewhere beyond the elder pines, his mate was crying. The sound sent his wolf into a frenzy, claws rending the soil as his muscles bunched to sprint. Jace blocked his path, palms raised. The Silver Fang rogues have been hunting near the borderlands. If they catch her scent, then I'll paint the trees with their entrails. The words emerged half human, half growl, as Kieran's jaw began its agonizing shift. Bones cracked and reformed as he rose onto two legs, his naked body sheened with sweat from the forced transformation. Jace's gaze dropped to Kieran's hands, where black claws still protruded from human fingers, then to the unmistakable erection straining against his abdomen. wound's breath. He whispered, "You can't mean—" The wind shifted again, carrying a whimper that sliced through Kieran like a silver blade. His mate's pain burned through the bond he hadn't even sealed yet, a white-hot brand against his soul. No more words. With a roar that shook the treetops, Kieran surrendered to the beast. Fur erupted across his skin as he dropped to all fours, his final human thought drowned in the wolf's single-minded imperative: protect, claim, keep. The forest blurred around him as he ran, branches whipping at his flanks. Somewhere behind, Jay shouted a warning, but the words meant nothing. Nothing except her. The acrid stench of burning pine resin yanked Sienna from restless dreams. Her eyes flew open to a nightmare, flames licking at the cabin's window frames, casting monstrous shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls. Embers rained from the ceiling like hellish snowflakes, searing tiny black marks into her grandmother's quilt. Somewhere outside, a chorus of guttural growls rose above the fire's roar. The sound raised every hair on Sienna's arms. Too many predators. Too close. Her pulse hammered in her throat as she scrambled backward, the mattress spring squealing in protest. Then, crack! The front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Two monstrous wolves filled the doorway, their silver-flecked coats matted with fresh blood. The larger one's muzzle dripped crimson, its sulphur-yellow eyes locking onto Sienna with terrifying focus. The stench of rotting meat rolled off them in waves. "Stay back!" Sienna's voice cracked as she grabbed the iron poker from the hearth. The metal burned her palm. She'd forgotten the fire, but she clung to it like a lifeline. The lead wolf's lips peeled back in what looked disturbingly like a grin, revealing blackened gums and jagged fangs. When it lunged, time slowed. Sienna saw the saliva stringing between its teeth, smelled the rancid meat caught in its claws. Then, impact. A black hurricane of fur and fury slammed into the rogue mid-air. The collision sent both beasts crashing through her kitchen table, wood splintering beneath their weight. Sienna barely registered the pain as a flying shard grazed her cheek. Her entire world narrowed to the massive black wolf now standing between her and death. Him, moonlight streaming through the broken roof, illuminated the strange markings swirling across his pelt, the same pattern she'd glimpsed in the forest. His golden eyes burned with an intelligence no ordinary animal possessed. When he snarled, the sound vibrated in her bones, carrying a single, impossible word. Mine. The poker clattered from her numb fingers. Some deep, primal part of her recognized that voice, not heard with ears but felt in her marrow. Her scars tingled violently, the old wounds glowing faintly silver beneath her skin. Chaos erupted outside, howls, snarls, the sickening crunch of bone. The black wolf. Kieran, her mind supplied, turned just as another rogue charged through the flaming doorway. Sienna moved without thought. She barely felt the jagged wood slice her palm as she snatched up a broken table leg. Didn't register the pain as she threw herself between Kieran and the attacker. The rogue's fangs tore through her forearm, hot blood spraying across the floorboards in perfect arcs. The world exploded. Kieran's transformation wasn't the smooth shift from movies. It was bone snapping, flesh tearing, a scream of agony that became a roar of pure rage. Naked and bleeding, he pinned the rogue with hands that blurred between human and clawed. "You dare touch what's mine?" His voice held layers, the growl of a beast, the resonance of something ancient. The rogue whimpered as Kieran's fingers, now tipped with obsidian claws, dug into its throat. Then Sienna's blood hit the floor. The effect was instantaneous. Wolfsbane vines burst through the cabin's cracks, their usually toxic purple flowers blooming into eerie silver lanterns. The air hummed with energy, making Sienna's teeth vibrate. The remaining rogues yelped and fled, tails tucked between their legs. Kieran froze, his golden eyes locked onto the glowing flowers, then dropped to Sienna's bleeding arm, where her wounds were knitting themselves closed before his eyes. The silver-streaked saliva dripping from his fangs sizzled where it struck the floor. As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Sienna saw true fear flicker across Kieran's face for the first time. His whispered words followed her into unconsciousness. "What magic have you brought into my territory, little wolf?" The infirmary smelled of crushed herbs and old blood. Sienna sat perched on the edge of the examination table, her fingers tracing the fresh scars along her forearm. Scars that shouldn't have healed so quickly. The morning light streaming through the infirmary windows felt too bright, too revealing, illuminating every tremor in her hands as she accepted the steaming mug from Jace. "Drink," he'd said with an encouraging nod. "It'll help with the pain." But the first sip turned to ash on her tongue. Bergamot, bitter almonds, and beneath it, something metallic that made her gums tingle unpleasantly. A shadow fell across the floor before she saw her. "Human?" The voice was like honey poured over broken glass. Vera stood framed in the doorway, the morning light catching the copper highlights in her russet braid. She wore her authority-like armor, black leather pants, a fitted vest that showed off the intricate pack tattoos snaking up her arms. The silver dagger at her belt gleamed with recent polish. Sienna's grip tightened around the mug. The liquid inside swirled ominously, tiny flecks of something dark floating to the surface. "I prefer Sienna," she said, forcing another sip past her lips. The tea burned going down, leaving a trail of fire in her throat. Vera's smile was all teeth. She prowled forward with the lethal grace of her wolf form, her boots clicking against the hardwood. "Oh, I know what you prefer." Her nostrils flared as she leaned in close, too close, her breath hot against Sienna's ear. "His scent is all over you, like cheap perfume on a—" Enough. The word cracked through the room like a gunshot. Kieran filled the doorway, his massive frame blocking the light. He wore only a pair of low-slung sweatpants, his bare chest still glistening from whatever violence he'd just interrupted. The fresh claw marks across his pectorals wept silver-tinged blood. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Vera didn't flinch. Alpha. She inclined her head in perfect submission, a contrast to the way her claws had unsheathed, pricking small crescents into her own palms. "I was just welcoming our guest." Sienna's vision blurred. The room tilted at a nauseating angle. Her fingers went numb, the mug slipping from her grasp to shatter against the floorboards. Where the tea spilled, the wood began to smoke, tiny tendrils of acrid vapor curling upward. Kieran crossed the room in 2 strides. His hand burned against the small of Sienna's back, whether from fever or the unnatural heat of his touch, she couldn't tell. "What did you do?" His voice was dangerously calm. Vera examined her nails. "Nothing she won't survive. Wolfsbane's only lethal to our kind." A deliberate pause. unless she's not as human as she claims. The growl that ripped from Kieran's chest shook the glass vials on the shelves. Sienna felt the vibration through his palm still pressed against her, felt the exact moment his control snapped. His transformation was horrifying. 1 second, he was all hard muscle and human fury. The next, his jaw elongated with a sickening crunch, his shirt shredding as obsidian claws burst from his fingertips. Half man, half beast, he had Vera pinned against the wall before she could blink, his partially shifted fangs inches from her throat. "Touch her again," he rasped, his voice distorted by the change, "and I'll remind the entire pack what happens to those who betray their alpha." For the first time, Vera's mask slipped. A flicker of genuine fear showed in her dilated pupils, in the rapid flutter of her pulse beneath Kieran's claws. The door burst open. Jace took in the scene, the shattered mug, Sienna's ashen complexion, Vera's feet dangling several inches off the ground, and sighed. "Well," he deadpanned, stepping over the still smoking floorboards, "this is going well." Behind him, 3 wide-eyed pack warriors hovered uncertainly. Jace waved them off. "Nothing to see here, just our alpha defending his mate from certain death. Business as usual." Sienna's stomach lurched. "Mate?" The word sent a strange thrill through her, one that had nothing to do with the poison coursing through her veins. The forest screamed around her. Sienna stumbled through a nightmare of smoke and flame, her lungs burning with every ragged breath. The rogue's fire had spread with unnatural speed, the flames licking hungrily at centuries-old pines that now stood as towering pyres. Embers rained down like hellish fireflies, searing tiny blisters across her exposed skin. "Kieran?" Her voice tore from her throat, raw and desperate, only to be swallowed by the inferno's roar. Somewhere in this chaos, her alpha fought. She'd seen him charge into the smoke after the rogue who'd thrown the first torch, his transformation mid-leap, leaving shreds of clothing in his wake. Then the wind had shifted. The fire became a living wall between them. Sienna's bare feet slipped on blood-slick leaves, whether hers or some animal's she couldn't tell. The smoke stung her eyes, reducing the world to blurred shapes, and the occasional flash of fangs as rogue wolves darted at the edges of her vision. That's when she heard it, not with her ears, but in her bones. "Run." The voice resonated through her skull, vibrating her teeth, a sound more felt than heard, all gravel and growl and "Kieran!" Her wrist scars burned white-hot, the old wounds glowing faintly beneath the soot staining her skin. She turned. Through the curtain of flame, a narrow path shimmered into existence, not untouched by fire, but parted by it. The flame bowing away to reveal trampled ferns glowing with eerie silver bioluminescence. The scent hit her then, cedar and storm and something unmistakably him. Sienna ran. The heat should have seared her lungs. The embers should have blistered her skin. Yet as she followed that glowing trail, the fire seemed to shy away from her, the flames licking curiously at her heels but never quite touching. Her scars pulsed in time with her racing heartbeat, each throb sending strange warmth radiating through her veins. The path led to a nightmare. Kieran lay trapped beneath a massive oak, the burning trunk pinning his hindquarters. Blood, too much blood, soaked his obsidian fur, the metallic tang cutting through the smoke. 3 broken-off branches protruded from his flank, their ends glowing red-hot where the fire licked at them. His golden eyes locked onto hers, wild with panic. "Go." The word came out half human, half-snarl as another branch cracked overhead. "Wind shifting! Can't hold!" A gust sent a fireball rolling toward them. Sienna didn't think. She plunged her hands into the burning wreckage. The pain was instantaneous. White-hot agony racing up her arms as flesh sizzled against smoldering wood. The smell of her own burning skin filled her nose, thick and nauseating. Kieran's roar of protest shook the ground, but she gritted her teeth and pushed. Something inside her shifted. The tree groaned as if alive, its burning bulk rolling just enough, and as it moved, Sienna watched in stunned horror as her blackened skin rennet itself, the blisters healing almost as fast as the flames could make them. Silence fell in the clearing. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Kieran stared at her hands, at the way the moonlight caught on the silver strands now visible in her healing flesh, and something like reverence crossed his battered features. With agonizing slowness, he dragged himself free, collapsing at her feet in a heap of blood-matted fur. His massive head lifted, tongue rasping over her ruined palms, where his saliva, streaked with liquid silver, touched. Her skin healed completely, leaving only faint silver scars in its wake. "You see now, little wolf?" His voice was raw, broken between laughter and something far more vulnerable. "You were never just human." Around them, the fire raged on, but not a single flame crossed into their sanctuary, as if some ancient magic recognized what even they were only beginning to understand. Some bonds defy even burning. The first gunshot shattered the night like a mirror breaking. Sienna jolted awake against Kieran's fur, her nostrils flaring at the acrid stench of silver nitrate and gunpowder that preceded the echo. The clearing's peaceful silence erupted into chaos as birds took flight in a cacophony of panicked wings. "Sienna!" That voice, once so familiar, now warped by hatred, sent ice water through her veins. Daniel emerged from the smoke like a specter from her past, his once pristine hunting jacket now singed at the edges. The Remington rifle in his hands gleamed with fresh oil, its silver-inlaid barrel catching the moonlight. Behind him moved shadows, resolving into men, a dozen at least, their faces masked with scarves dipped in wolfsbane extract. Their gloves shimmered with the telltale weave of silver mesh. Kieran's transformation was instantaneous. Fur receded like a retreating tide as he rose to his full height, naked and bleeding, but utterly unashamed. The arrow still protruding from his shoulder wept silver-laced blood that sizzled where it hit the forest floor. "You!" Daniel's voice cracked on the word. His knuckles whitened around the rifle stock. "Of course it would be you." The air between them vibrated with decades of unspoken history. Sienna's gaze darted between them, the werewolf who'd claimed her and the man who'd rejected her, seeing the connection for the first time. "Daniel?" Her voice sounded small against the tension. "You know each other?" Daniel's laugh was a broken thing. "Know him?" He gestured wildly with the rifle. "His pack murdered my parents 10 years ago tonight, right here in these woods." Kieran's growl sent vibrations through the earth. "They were hunting our children during the moon silence." His claws extended, retracted. "Your father put a silver bullet through a 6-year-old's heart." The blood drained from Daniel's face. He was following council orders? His shout startled an owl from his perch. When he turned to Sienna, his eyes held a manic gleam. "That's why I ended it. The night before our engagement, I found the family archives, the hunter's oaths, the kill records." He jerked his chin at the armed men. "I was trying to keep you out of this war." The revelation struck like a physical blow. Sienna's hands flew to her mouth as the pieces clicked together. Daniel's sudden coldness, the way he'd flinched from her touch those last weeks, the mysterious meetings he'd refused to discuss. All this time she'd thought herself abandoned. "You let me believe," her voice broke. "You made me think I wasn't enough." Daniel's rifle wavered. "I was protecting you." The twang of a crossbow cut through the night. Sienna barely registered the silver-tipped arrow whizzing past her cheek before it buried itself in Kieran's shoulder with a sickening thunk. Kieran's roar of pain became her own as white-hot fire exploded across her collarbone, the mate bond transmitting his agony directly to her nervous system. As Kieran collapsed to his knees, the forest erupted into bedlam. But Sienna was already falling, not to the ground, but into memory. Vision fragment. A younger Daniel, no more than 16, kneeling in scarlet snow beside two bullet-riddled bodies. The same silver-inlaid rifle lay broken at his feet. His wail of grief shook icicles from the trees. Vision Fragment 2. Kieran's pack gathered around a tiny grave, their mourning song making the northern lights ripple overhead. The alpha of that time, Kieran's father, placed a stuffed wolf toy atop the mound. Vision Fragment 3. A council chamber, deep underground. Men in hunter's green passing a silver dagger around a table, each adding a drop of blood to a wolf's bane-filled chalice. Her blood mixed with his, creating swirling silver patterns where they touched. Daniel stood frozen, his rifle slack in his hands. What are you?" Sienna lifted her glowing palms. "I think the better question is, what have we all been turned into?" Around them, the hunters hesitated, their weapons lowering as they took in the silver light radiating from the bonded pair. The cycle of violence hung suspended in that moment, balanced on the edge of a knife. And for the first time in generations, there was a chance to step back from the brink. The sacred clearing pulsed with ancient energy, the standing stones humming with power as the blood moon reached its zenith. Sienna's bare feet sank into the warm earth, each step leaving faintly glowing prints that shimmered like crushed stars. The air tasted of copper and lightning, thick with the scent of impending transformation. Vera stood at the circle's center, her claws buried in Kieran's throat, deep enough that silver-tinged blood painted her fingers. The moonlight caught the cruel twist of her lips as she tightened her grip. "Last chance, little human." Vera's voice slithered through the clearing, dripping with false sympathy. "Renounce him now, and I'll let you leave with your fragile life intact." She leaned closer, her breath hot against Sienna's cheek. "You'll never survive the change anyway." Behind Vera, the rogue wolves formed a snarling semicircle. Their mangy coats bore the scars of countless battles, their yellowed fangs dripping with venom. The largest, a monstrous gray with one milky eye, licked his chops in anticipation. Kieran's golden eyes burned into Sienna's, his massive chest heaving with restrained power. The muscles in his arms stood out like cords as he fought against Vera's hold. "Don't do this," he rasped, his voice thick with pain. "The first shift could kill you without proper preparation." Sienna stepped forward, the ancient markings on the stones flaring to life as she crossed the threshold. The moment her feet touched the ritual circle, The scars on her wrist ignited with silver fire, the 4 parallel lines glowing like molten metal. The world seemed to pause. Even the wind stilled. With deliberate slowness, Sienna reached for Kieran's face. Her fingers trembled as they brushed the blood from his lips, leaving smears of silver where she touched. "I've spent 27 years running from myself," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Tonight, I finally come home." Vera's snarl of outrage was the last human sound Sienna heard before she dragged her palm across Kieran's extended fang. The pain was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her bones shattered and reformed in rapid succession. 1,000 fractures healing instantly only to break again. Her spine arched unnaturally, vertebrae popping as her tailbone elongated. The scream that tore from her throat became a howl midway, the sound shaking leaves from nearby trees. Through the haze of agony, Sienna became aware of new sensations. The forest's heartbeat thrumming through her paws. The individual scent signatures of every creature within a mile radius. The electric current of the pack bonds humming through her veins. When the transformation completed, the world came into hyper-sharp focus. Colors were more vibrant, scents layered with meaning, sounds crisp and distinct. She looked down to see delicate paws, smaller than the other wolves, but with claws like polished onyx that gleamed with unnatural sharpness. Vera's gasp of shock was almost comical. Impossible! She shouldn't have survived. Kieran's answering roar shook the very earth as he exploded into motion. His massive black form blurred as he broke free, but instead of attacking Vera, he lunged past her, taking down the gray rogue with surgical precision. The message was clear. This fight is yours to finish. Sienna didn't hesitate. Her new body moved with instinctive grace, flowing between opponents like smoke. Where Vera fought with calculated brutality, Sienna moved with wild precision, her smaller size allowing her to dart between the rogue's defenses. Her teeth found vulnerable tendons. Her claws raked across sensitive noses, her movements fueled by something deeper than training. The absolute certainty that this was her birthright. When the last rogue fled whimpering into the trees, Sienna turned to find Kieran watching her with undisguised awe. Blood matted his fur, but his golden eyes shone with pride as he closed the distance between them. His warm tongue rasped over her muzzle in a gentle caress before he nipped playfully at her ear. Through their newly forged bond, his voice resonated in her mind, rich with emotion. "You were always a wolf, my love. You just needed the moon to remind you." As the blood moon bathed them in its crimson glow, Sienna finally understood the truth written in her scars, in her blood, in the very core of her being. She hadn't been broken. She hadn't been lost. She'd simply been waiting for the right moon to call her home,